To introduce our speaker today is the chairman of the PSC, Paul Susky. Prior to his appointment to the Public Service Commission and chairmanship by Governor Beebe, he served as North Little Rock City Attorney, where he was very much involved with utility-related issues. He's a graduate of the UALR Bowen School of Law, and he is a major in the Arkansas Army National Guard, serving tours of duty both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as everyone knows by now, I'm sure President Obama is in Iraq today, is in Baghdad. Paul has worked at the state, at the local, and at the national levels, and he brings great experience to this position at the PSC. So please welcome the chairman of the Arkansas Public Service Commission, Mr. Paul Susky.
Thank you, Skip, and on behalf of Commissioner Honorable and Commissioner Reeves, thank you for partnering with the Public Service Commission and hosting today's Sustainable Energy Resources Collaborative. I would also like to welcome all members here today from our utilities, as well as some of our senior leaders in our community here in Arkansas to participate in today's luncheon. When the Commission established the Sustainable Docket number 08144U, the Commission noted that we are facing challenging times in both our gas and our electric industry. We began this collaborative earlier this year with the joint appearance of Ralph Cavanna of the National Resources Defense Council and David Owens of EEI, Edison Electric Institute. These two men offered their perspectives on the challenges and opportunities facing our utility industries today. They gave us some thoughts to think about and things to consider as we move forward in this docket. Today, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the second speaker of this collaborative. He was the first CEO of an electric utility, or one of the first, to call for addressing CO2 emissions. He has offered a way to resolve the predicament of efficiency that utilities face by proposing a Save-A-Watt program that removes the disincentives utilities have for less cells and also gives an incentive to a utility to promote efficiency. He brings a unique perspective, Mr. Rogers does. He has been at what I call the three core aspects of our industry. You have ratepayer advocates, you have regulators, and you have the utilities. He's been all three. He was a consumer advocate as an assistant attorney general for the Commonwealth of Kentucky when he intervened on behalf of state consumers in gas, electric, and telephone cases. He has been a utility regulator. While at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Mr. Rogers served in a variety of positions, including the Deputy General Counsel for Litigation and Enforcement. And he has over almost 20 years' experience as a utility CEO. In 1998, he joined PSI Energy as the company's chairman and president. In 2006, Mr. Rogers was named as president and chief executive officer of Duke Energy following the merger of Duke Energy and Synergy. Before the merger, he spent more than 11 years as Synergy's chairman and CEO. Interesting note, which we had a good conversation earlier, he's also been a reporter. While he was in school, he was a reporter in Lexington, Kentucky for the Herald Leader, and he also told us he's a big Kentucky fan, so we may want to ask him about their new basketball coach while he's here. You may have a few Razorback fans in the audience today. As CEO of Duke Energy, he has an impressive resume. He has served as past chairman of the Edison Electric Institute and chairman of the Institute for Electric Efficiency. He has served on the boards of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the National Coal Council, the National Petroleum Council, and the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. He's past chairman of the Edison Foundation and co-chair of the National Action Plan on Energy Efficiency. He serves on the board of directors and executive committee for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. He has testified 16 times on energy and environmental policies before the U.S. Congress. In 2007, Jim Rogers was named Energy Industry CEO of the Year by Platts and Business Person of the Year by the Charlotte Business Journal. He has a Bachelor's of Administration from Emory and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Kentucky. His wife, Mary Ann, they have 2 daughters, a son, and 7 grandchildren. He informed me earlier this is his first visit to Little Rock, so let's give a big Arkansas welcome to Jim Rogers.
That was terrific. Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and Paul, thank you very much. You can tell from that introduction I've had difficulty holding a job in my career. But also I was up late last night. Well, actually I only had to watch the first half. I do bleed blue and white, but it's Kentucky blue and white, not North Carolina. I clearly don't bleed Duke blue and white, because I still remember, as we talked earlier, about the Christian Laettner shot in 1992, and I've yet to get over that. Thank y'all very much for being here. What a magnificent facility. What a great opportunity. And I look forward to answering your questions. I am going to err today on the side of responding to questions because I think that creates a sharper, more focused conversation. But I'd like to kick it off and give you a little background. As Paul said, I've spent more than 20 years as a CEO in this industry. And it's been an honor for me to serve this industry. And since the very beginning, in 1988, I've approached the job as primarily my responsibility is to all the stakeholders, not just investors, but to the customers, to the employees, to the communities that we serve, to the environment. And it's this stakeholder approach that's really been my true north. It's been the center in which allows me to make tough decisions and make the tough trade-offs. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are. I'm going to talk about how we're redefining the boundaries of our business and some of the challenges that we face. Then I want to talk about building a bridge to a low-carbon world, because I'm one that believes that climate change is a problem. It's a challenge. It might be one of the greatest ecological challenges that we've faced, and that as an industry and as a country and as a world, we can meet that challenge. Then I want to talk about how we go about it and the specific things that we need to do to address the issue. A little bit about our company, because it'll give you a sense of where I come from, what the biases that I have, and that will help focus your questions and understand a little bit my point of view. We're the 3rd largest generator of electricity in the Americas. We have a very large operation here in the U.S. as well as in South America. We're the 3rd largest generator of electricity from coal. We're the 3rd largest generator of electricity from nuclear. So that is the footprint that we have today. We serve over 4 million customers in 5 states. We touch the lives of over 11 million people. And we approach our business, as I said, from a stakeholder's perspective. And through the years, we've had many challenges, and we'll continue to have challenges going forward. But we think the single greatest challenge is really what I call job one. Job one for a guy in my role and for a company like ours is to provide affordable, reliable, clean electricity 24/7. And that is really how the debates all evolve. Because when we think of the different ways to generate electricity, we think, well, is it affordable? But what's affordable might not always be clean. What might be clean might not be reliable. What might be reliable might not be clean. So it's in that trade-off and the notion that people want power 24/7 is what really challenges us, focuses us, and that is really where the debate's center is, around those competing objectives that we have to pursue every day. Think back with me to the 20th century. I had the good fortune of having Neil Armstrong on my board for almost a decade. And when I had a close vote, I always started my presentations, one small step. I always got his vote. But he was the chairman of the National Academy of Engineers, and they looked back over the 20th century and said, what was the greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century? Was it putting a man on the moon? Was it the internet? Was it cars? Was it the development of the industry of this country? No. It was the electrification of America. We provided universal access to people all across this country. That was our mission. And you think about how it started in 1900 and how it unfolded and the different kind of suppliers we have today, from co-ops to munis to investor-owned utilities, a wide range of suppliers, each providing electricity, fundamentally changing the economy of our country and fundamentally changing the way we live. And you go, well, that seems kind of routine today. I go into my home and I throw a switch and there it is. But think about this fact. 1.6 billion people today in the world do not have access to electricity. 5 times the population of our country do not have access to electricity. They do not have access to the modern world, to the internet, to television, and to the future, to clean water. These are things they do not have access to because they do not have access to electricity. And we do. And then look at the prices around the world. Go to other countries. Our prices are much lower in the U.S. than if you go to certain parts of Europe today, and the prices are much higher. So we've been able to provide affordable, reliable electricity 24/7. But that's really about the past. That's about where we have been. Let me frame our conversation today about where we're going, because I believe our mission in the 21st century is changing, and it's going to change this way. My aspiration for our industry and for our country is that we modernize and decarbonize our electric supply. That will allow us to address the climate change issue. And I'll come back to that more in a moment. The second mission that I believe that power suppliers, utilities, co-ops, and munis should have is to help make our communities the most energy efficient in the world. In the same way we provided universal access to electricity, we should be able to provide universal access to energy efficiency, services, and products. And the question is, how do we do that? What kind of regulatory model, what kind of business model will really allow us to achieve that? Let's talk about decarbonization for a moment and then move forward to the second aspiration of energy efficiency. There are 5 ways you can generate electricity. One is with energy efficiency, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Secondly, you can do it with coal. 50% of the electricity in this country comes from coal. There are over 25 states where more than 50% of the electricity comes from coal. Here in Arkansas, 47% of the electricity comes from coal. Coal is really critical. It's an abundant resource. But quite frankly, we don't have the technology today to allow us to remove carbon from it. We've invested significant dollars in reducing the emissions of SOx, or sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, mercury, and fine particulate. Our company alone has spent $5 billion just reducing emissions from our coal plants. But more work to do to be able to use coal in the 21st century. And we're, as a company, building a coal gasification facility in Indiana, in the middle of the mine fields, the coal fields. And basically, we're going to have the ability to have the world's largest coal gasification facility and the world's largest carbon capture and sequestration facility. We need to do 5 or 10 major sequestration projects in order to commercialize this technology so we can use it across this country. That will allow us to use coal going forward. And there's a need for significant investment to scale that technology, and I believe that we can do it. And that's one of the missions at our company. Because we're the 3rd largest consumer of coal in the country, we need to find a way to use that coal going forward. Secondly, with nuclear, I believe nuclear is the only technology that we have today that allows us to provide electricity 24/7 with 0 greenhouse gas emissions. So if you sat here today and said, I had to make a bet on tomorrow and I wanted to cross the bridge to a low-carbon world, what would you bet on? The only thing you know for sure today is that you can do it with nuclear. But that's not without issues, because we still have issues in terms of new modern nuclear technologies. How do you handle the spent fuel issue? And there's a rich debate that can be had with respect to that. But I believe nuclear isn't the only answer, but it is part of the answer to crossing this bridge to a low-carbon world. So you've got energy efficiency, you've got coal, you've got nuclear, you've got natural gas, but natural gas has got 50% of the carbon footprint of coal. And natural gas has actually become the crack cocaine of our industry. And you go, well, what does that mean? Well, for the last 15 years, we haven't built coal plants, we haven't built nuclear plants. What we've built is gas plants. And over 20% of our electricity in this country comes from natural gas. And for gas producers, that's a good thing. And once in my career, I used to represent gas producers. But the fact of the matter is it's still very expensive to take carbon out of natural gas. And, the price is very volatile. It's low today, but it's been higher in the past. And so volatility and high prices is not a good answer in achieving our affordability goals. And I'm actually old enough to remember and actually live in Washington when they passed a law in 1978 that prohibited the burning of natural gas to generate electricity. Most people don't remember that because it was a premium fuel and shouldn't be used for anything like generating electricity. As one person said, and I can vaguely remember how they said it, it was sort of like using fine scotch to wash your dishes. And I'm going, well, not a perfect analogy. But point is that natural gas, they repealed that law in '85, and since then we've used natural gas to generate electricity in this country. So it plays a role. Renewables play an important role. And our company has over 500 megawatts of wind. We are the largest supplier of wind to Walmart in Texas from our Texas operation. We have over 5,000 megawatts of wind that's under development. So we're investing in wind. But wind has limitations. It has limitations in terms of it's intermittent. You can't use it 24/7. And until we develop storage, and storage is the holy grail, it can't contribute in an equal way to some of the other sources in a low-carbon world. But more work needs to get done there with respect to technology. Solar. We have proposed in North Carolina a very innovative program where we would actually invest and put solar on the rooftop. We would invest in it, we would install it, we would own it, we would operate it, we would dispatch it, we would maintain it, and we look at the rooftop of our customers as if they're power plant sites. Because what we wanted to do is start to learn to integrate solar into our system, because we think it's critical to be able to utilize that resource going forward. But like wind, it has limitations, in part tied to you don't get it 24/7. It's intermittent, not only within the day, but it's intermittent within a minute. And so you don't get that smooth electricity that comes from that you do from other sources. So all of these, I believe, play a very important role in the future. But each and every one of them, think about it, whether it's coal or nuclear or gas, or whether it's solar or wind, each requires advances in technology. And as I think about the climate issue, and I've been an advocate, I testified in 2001 before Congress that says we ought to have carbon regulation. I personally believe that cap and trade is the right approach. A cap on carbon with it declining over time, a price on carbon, timelines and goals set out 2020, 2030, 2050 with an 80% reduction by 2050. I believe we can set those kind of goals and reach those goals, but we can't do it without technology. At the Pentagon, they say that a vision without resources is an hallucination. I would tell you a carbon policy without technology is an hallucination. So for us to move across this bridge that I'm talking about to a low carbon world, what we really need is we really need significant investment in technology and development of technology. And we need to bring the costs down of all these different alternatives. We need storage. We need to solve the issue of spent fuel for nuclear. We need CCS. We need all these things to allow us to maintain our quality of life in the future. Let me now turn and focus a little more on energy efficiency, because it's one of those things that's easy to talk about, hard to do. Our company proposed a couple years ago a notion called Save a Watt. And Save a Watt, Tom Friedman said in a column that it was the mother of all energy paradigm changes. That's a high bar, and as slow as it's taken for me to get approval of it, I'm going, man, paradigm changes are hard work. And it is hard work. Because for 100 years when we were providing universal access to electricity, we built a regulatory model that compensated us for building power plants. As demand grew and as we reached out and connected more customers, and as our economy grew, we built more power plants, and that's how we made money. That's how we attracted capital. We're now in a different place. Everybody's been connected. Our economy is still growing. Demand is still going up, even though in this recessionary period it might feel like times are tough. But I do think that, like all recessions, we will work our way out of this. Don't ask me when. I'm not smart enough to tell you that. I've talked to a lot of smart economists and they're not sure either. But the fact of the matter is we will find our way out of this. We always have, and we will going forward. I have confidence in that. But we need to change the regulatory model. And we sat back and said, well, how would you do that? How would you do it different? How would you develop a system that would work? And I know y'all recently heard from Ralph Cavanagh, and I bet he talked about decoupling. Well, decoupling's a good idea. It makes companies economically indifferent with respect to their sales and their profits. But can you name one thing that's ever been achieved in this country as a consequence of indifference? It takes more than indifference to create an energy efficient economy. What it really takes are incentives. The same incentives that we had to build power plants and build transmission lines and distribution lines to hook up consumers across this country, we need to change the regulatory paradigm where we get compensated for reducing a megawatt. In the same way we get compensated for building a megawatt. And so our Save a Watt is really predicated on the notion where we'll spend the money, we'll take the risk, and if at the end of the day we can deliver a reduction in demand and a third party can come in and verify it, then we ought to get compensated for it at what I call 90% of the avoided costs. So it's cheaper than building a new plant, but it gives us a strong incentive because those costs are capitalized. We earn off those costs in the same way as if we built a power plant. And I say the most energy efficient power plant you can build is the one you don't build. And I believe if we could get the regulatory model right, we'll get the business model right, and we'll get the investment. Because here's the dream that I have. The boundaries of our business have been defined from generation to transmission to distribution to the meter. That's our business. Those are our boundaries. That's where we make money. And the fact of the matter is we need to transform what I call the grid or the mother grid. It is now an analog 20th century grid. We need to turn it into a digital grid. I mean, we don't know we have an outage until somebody calls us. Can you imagine that in the 21st century? What we really need is to take our grid and make it a smart grid. And that simply means two-way communication. That means all the way from generation through the transmission, through the distribution to the meter. But putting a meter in with two-way communication is part of the answer because it opens the door to real energy efficiency. Because the meter has been historically our cash register. That kind of tells you what you bought, tells you what we charge you. But I see it as a vehicle to invest beyond the meter. What does that mean? I would rather spend, and I'm looking at building a nuclear plant, $11 billion. I would rather spend that $11 billion on the infrastructure of our customers, residential, commercial, and industrial customers, to help them use energy wisely is to invest that $11 billion in a nuclear plant. With the right regulatory model, I would be incented to do that. So I see in the future us investing in our customers. Think about it. If we have 4 million customers that touch 11 million people, and every customer has got 6 to 8 circuits, there's 32 million circuits, and on every circuit there is 5 applications and I'm a lawyer so the math won't be perfect, 150 million applications. What if you could write the software for every customer to meet their comfort and convenience within their home? What if you could write a software that would optimize the use of electricity among all the residential customers in the area, with all the commercial customers, with all the industrial customers, and you could optimize it against the grid? Think about that. That, to me, will be the breakthrough that will allow us as a country to really thrive in the future, because we will become the most energy efficient economy in the world. And it's not, to me, energy efficiency is not putting a list of 15 things on the refrigerator and saying, okay, I got to get up this morning, I got to turn this off and do this and do that. And I mean, we don't have time. There are about 10 to 15% of the people that would get on their computer and figure it out and do all that. I just don't happen to be one of them. But there are people that do and have the value of that in their lives. What we need to do is to make energy efficiency as back of mind as throwing that switch. So when you turn on electricity in your home, you're not saying, is that from a nuclear plant? Is that from a coal plant? You don't even think where it's from. Actually, I was at a public hearing once where a woman said, I don't understand why you have to build all these power plants. Don't you know that electricity comes from the wall? And I think we need to make energy efficiency come from the wall so that people don't think about it. But at the same time, we need to be careful not to be Mother Knows Best. Let me tell you how to use energy. But people tell us how they want to use energy. We write the program for them, and they get it automatically the way they want it. That's the challenge. The investment in the software, the investment in the sensing devices, the investment in the HVAC system. And then I think about a family that's got only so much discretionary income. And they had a choice between spending $5,000 on a new HVAC system or sending their child to college. And they have that choice. We know what they're going to do. They're going to send the kid to college because that is the future. What I want us to do as a company is have the capability to allow them to send their child to college, and we invest in the HVAC system so that they get energy efficiency. And the reason I say this, and I feel so strongly about it, is that I believe we're in a period coming off a decade and a half where the real price of electricity has actually come down. And I look out in the future and I see an aging infrastructure, more investment. I see the need to convert our grid from analog to smart grid, more investment. I see the need between now and 2050, every power plant our company owns is going to be retired and replaced. I see that happening, and I see those additional costs being incurred. I see carbon regulation coming, and depending on how it plays out, and I'd be delighted to debate how it ought to come out, but the fact of the matter is that will drive prices up. And when I add all this up, we're going to see a significant increase in the price of electricity over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's coming. And I'd much rather be on the front end helping customers get control of their usage going into the rise in prices than after. It's a smarter place to be. And people have control of their destiny. And they feel like they have the capability to control their usage because at the end of the day, as the price goes up, if they can bring their usage down, that allows them to mitigate some of the price increases that are coming. And that's what we've got to do because we can't forget the job is affordable, reliable, clean, 24/7. Now let me say two things in closing. As my wife says, I never say two things. First, after 20 years as CEO, I just signed up for 5 more years. And I said, well, why would you do that? I mean, you're old and 20 years is enough, and your kids are out of college. You got plenty of money, although it's not so clear these days. I got a lot less than I did a year ago. But the fact of the matter is, I think these next 5 years are the most exciting 5 years in the history of our career. We will fundamentally transform this business. We will pass carbon legislation in this country that put us on a trajectory of crossing that bridge to a low-carbon world. And I think we're going to be judged. I know how I'm judged. I'm judged when a customer throws a switch and the lights come on, or not. I don't like that or not part. I'm judged at the end of the month when somebody opens their bill up and they go, oh my goodness, as to whether it's affordable. I'm judged every quarter and every year by the investors in our company. And we pay $1.3 billion a year in dividends. I mean, that's cash that we send to those who invest in our company. I'm judged there. But I think the ultimate judgment will be, and I've added a grandchild since that was written, and I'm happy to report, probably the last one I've been told by my children. Not that I ever had any control over it. But I'm going to be judged by my 8 grandchildren by what I call the grandchildren's test. Because someday when they're my age, they're going to look back. And I want them to look back at the decisions that I've made at this time, particularly on this carbon issue, and look back at the decisions I've made and say, you know, my granddaddy, his decisions that he made back at the turn of the century were really good decisions and are still good today and help put our communities and our country on the right path. That's the test that I really want to pass, is the grandchildren's test. But I also know that I can't pass the grandchildren's test unless I change my thinking. And it goes from this sort of short-term to long-term. And this is the last thought I'll leave with you. If you've been to Europe, you've seen all the great cathedrals. Those cathedrals weren't built overnight. In fact, if you've been to many of them, and I recently took my granddaughter to Paris, to Notre Dame, and it was a long, complicated story about how I ended up there with her, but I'd be glad to share sometime. But it took them 104 years to build that cathedral. It didn't take, and back then, given lifespan, we're talking 3 generations. And bottom line is, the guys that worked on the foundation, the architect never saw it finished. The people that worked on the foundation never saw the stained glass windows. Those that worked on the stained glass windows never saw the steeple. They never saw it finished. But they had faith. They believed in the vision of what they were doing, even though they knew they would never see it finished in their lifetime. And I think that is the kind of thinking that we need to bring to energy and environmental issues in this country. And it means we need to go to work now to get the architecture designed so we can lay the foundation and build the windows and build the walls and build the future for our children and grandchildren. Thank you all very much for inviting me.
We've got some time for some questions. If you'd raise your hands and wait for the microphone to get there, okay? Right there, if they should, yes.
Thank you. That was a very interesting talk. Can you give me an idea of how much it costs to produce 1 unit of electricity with coal versus gas versus nuclear energy?
It depends on whether you measure it based on capacity or kilowatt hours. And it depends on, and the fact of the matter is, and it depends on what the gas price is and the coal price. I mean, it's a very complicated answer. But the fact of the matter is, if you look over the longer term, for our company, 97% of our electricity comes from coal and nuclear, even though 20% of our capacity is natural gas, because we don't use it that often except for peaking periods. But the conventional wisdom is you need to think of it in the context, and I'm going to complicate the answer because I want you to think about it in terms of the future. In the future, we're going to live in a carbon-constrained world, so you have to put a price on carbon. And then when you start putting a price on carbon and you put a projected price on natural gas, projected price on CCS, a projected price on nuclear, and then you look at the load factors of each of these units. And I'm sounding a little wonkish now, I know. But the fact of the matter is a really tough analysis shows you that nuclear on a kilowatt hour basis is cheaper, particularly in a world where carbon prices are $30, $40, and $50. And I think that's the direction we're going on a per ton basis. We haven't yet commercialized CCS, so we're making a guess about how it works. And we're building a co-gasification plant, and we know it's cheaper to do carbon capture off the front end of a coal gas plant than off the back end of a traditional pulverized coal plant. We know that. With gas plants, the huge variable is really the price of gas. Today it's $4. A year ago it was $12, and so the math is a little different. And even natural gas, and I have a feeling about natural gas, is this. We have the same level of dependency on foreign sources of natural gas today as we did with oil in the 50s, in the 60s. We put a plug in one arm on the oil, and I think if we start using natural gas as sort of as I said, the crack cocaine of generating electricity, I think we run the high risk of putting a needle in the other arm. And for what great purpose? Because if anybody has ever studied LNG, what you find is by the time you pull it, and you're buying it from countries outside of our country, because I think we need to move toward, there's no such thing as energy independence per se, but we need to be more independent than we are today. But I believe that by the time you take gas out of the ground, you liquefy it, you transport it, you gasify it, it has 80% of the carbon footprint of burning U.S. coal. So we need to kind of do the math all the way through and to look at the path it takes us down. And again, I apologize for such a complex answer, but I think it's very important to understand that there's no bumper sticker answer to your question.
Right here. Thisha, let's go up the back. There's a student right there behind you, and then we'll come up here.
Thanks. I'm a student here at the school. Thanks for coming and speaking today. My question is first, where do you see the intersection between technology and policy? And then also, where do you see the most prospect for change in state policy versus federal policy on this issue? Just in the sense of, we have California with their 2006 groundbreaking legislation there versus now we've got the new Obama administration and Representative Waxman's proposals and things like that. So where do you see the most opportunity for change on a policy level? And then how does that relate to the technology being developed?
That's a very sophisticated and difficult question. First of all, between state and federal, I think we need to have a new energy federalism in this country. And that is, it's easy for me to say in Arkansas because none of my state commissioners are here. And because this is being recorded, I'm going to be extremely careful. But I think what we need to do is, here's the competing considerations. We've got 50 different states. Each state is a lab. Each can experiment with different approaches and find out what is the best approach, whether it's to energy efficiency or to any other issue. But quite frankly, we need some uniform policy across the country. And let me give you an example. A lot of the people that really call for more wind, more renewables, and I've spent a lot of time in Congress walking the halls talking about this issue, those very same people that call for more renewables oppose eminent domain to build transmission lines because they want to leave it totally to the local community to make a determination where the transmission line goes. We can't have it both ways because it could take, I built transmission lines, it could take 7 to 8 years to build a transmission line by the time you get all the permits and you work through the local process. So that's an example of an issue that you need to kind of get the state-federal relationships realigned. But the fact of the matter is the way our industry evolved, it evolved state by state, actually community by community, and then state by state. And so, again, even on an issue like renewable portfolio standards, I believe it should be left to the states. But I think the federal government should say every state should mandate, should have a renewable portfolio standard by a certain date. But leave it to the state to determine, because one size doesn't fit all. There are 30 states with renewable portfolio standards today, and they're all a little different. Some have economic provisions that say, you know, if it gets to be too expensive, you only need this much, because they're making the trade-offs between affordable and clean at the state level, and they understand the economic development circumstances. So I do think we need to have a conversation about this new energy federalism. With respect to technology and cap and trade, as I said earlier, I believe the sooner we get a price on carbon, the better. The sooner we get a cap on emissions, the better. I also believe, because the SO2 program was so successful, that came from the Clean Air Act amendments in 1990, that we ought to grant allowances and make sure that the transition with those allowances matches up with the technology roadmap. Because if you don't, you're going to put unnecessary cost on those states that are very dependent on coal. And not all states, well, I mean, take Arkansas. Arkansas, 47% of electricity comes from coal, but you look at the co-ops in this state, 78% comes from coal. And under President Obama's plan at $20 a ton, I dare say that would raise rates 25 to 30%. Is that the right answer on a 100% auction? I don't think so, politically. So smoothing out the rate increases, making sure the technology matches up over time with this transition period is really critical, which really gets back to the point. We really need to invest in technology. We need carbon capture sequestration for coal. We need to solve recycling for spent fuel, for nuclear. We need to solve storage technology that would make wind and solar better contributors. So we need huge investment in technology. And we even need huge investment in technologies to make the grid smarter, but huge investments in energy efficiency technology. Because we've only just begun to develop the sensing devices, to write the software packages. I mean, there's a tremendous set of opportunities here that, in my judgment, transform our economy. And one last point that your question really begs, and that's this. We have a stimulus package that's been passed by the government. We also have a green stimulus component. If we pass cap and trade now, it provides linkage that allows us to have a long-term roadmap and we will get the most bang from the buck in the stimulus package if we have a price on carbon. Because then we'll start to make decisions, not shovel-ready jobs. I just don't like that term because it sounds like the Depression. It sounds like third world. I'm looking for 21st century jobs, technology jobs. And in our sector, we can create those kind of jobs if we've got a clear roadmap going forward. And those are high-paying jobs, and those are jobs that are the envy of the world. That's the kind of jobs that we ought to be stimulating in this country. Thank you for your question.
Someone had their hand up? If not, yeah, right here. There was this question right here.
Yes, sir. What sort of nuclear power plant are you planning on installing in your new reactor, your new power plant you alluded to? Is it one of the newer generation plants?
It is. It is the Westinghouse Toshiba plant. We're looking at 2,200 megawatts in Cherokee County, South Carolina. And we are in the first wave of applications to be approved by the NRC. We're, by the way, also building a coal plant down in North Carolina. And we've taken a lot of criticism for building that coal plant because it's a supercritical plant. It's not coal gasification. But what most people don't know about that plant is that when we build that 800 megawatt plant, we will shut down 1,000 megawatts of 60-year-old plants. And our SOx, NOx, mercury footprint is going to be even smaller than what's required by the law. And the carbon intensity of our product will be much less. While we have, and sometimes I use these numbers because I'm looking for solutions for carbon because there's three numbers that really define our carbon footprint. 3, 12, 41. We're the third largest emitter of CO2 in the United States among all companies. We're the 12th largest emitter among all companies in the world. And if we were one of the 192 countries in the United Nations, we'd be ranked 41st. I'm not bragging about this, but I'm telling you that because it's a daunting challenge that we have to make this transformation with a carbon footprint that big, to make the transformation in a way that smooths out the cost impact on our consumers and allows our electricity to be affordable in the regions of the country that we serve when we've made the transition. And that's why I think hard about that original question, well, should I build coal, should I build gas, should I build nuclear? What's going to be the lowest cost in a low carbon world? And that's why when I answer the question about technology, I think technology is really the key to making that transition in a low-cost way.
You have a question right over here, Paul.
Yes. You started out your comments today with your bias about your footprint and your role as a stakeholder. You also pointed out the need for a paradigm change and what hard work that was. So I have a paradigm shift that I have read about and want to propose, and that is, and it's two-part. One is moving from the concept of scarcity to one of abundance. That in fact there is not a scarcity of energy, there is an abundance of energy. And also that we start thinking about utilities or energy in a decentralized way. And so when you talk about clean, reliable, cost, and effectiveness, take out of that the underwriting supports for a system that is centralized and the lack of those supports for something that is decentralized. Because in Arkansas, you talked about state policy, we're facing a very frustrating legislature here who will not open themselves up to more decentralized energy sources, and standing in the way have been our utility companies that are fighting us on that. So I'd like to hear your comments to that.
I think you're asking me to get in the middle of the fight in the last week of the legislature. I know better. But nevertheless, we do have in this country a great abundance of opportunity. We do have in this country an incredible technical, intellectual capability to develop new technologies. And I have great confidence in the imagination and the capability and the intellect of our people to come up with new ways to produce energy and to provide energy going forward. As you think back to the history of how we got to central station plants, that wasn't Thomas Edison's original dream. His original dream is you'd put a little unit in every home or on every block. His first plant was Pearl Street plant in New York. And it was to serve one block, and he wasn't measuring it by kilowatt hour. He went around and counted the number of light bulbs that were on and was going to charge them based on the number of lights that came on, which I thought kind of is an interesting kind of where, in a way, what you're proposing is back to the future, and we're going back to there. But think about what happened in the 20th century. We had these small plants, but it was very expensive. Then we started building bigger plants and bigger plants and bigger plants because it brought the costs down. So as we did electrification across the country, reaching out and touching every home on every farm, in every community, every business, we had to get the costs down, and we got the costs down by building bigger and bigger plants. And the whole idea of central station plants came from the providing universal access to everybody in this country at low cost. Got that done. Now we're at a place where we have a cost marker, and so the question is, can we do distributed generation at equal or less cost? I'm not ruling it out. I think it's possible. But I think there's going to be a transition period because it won't happen overnight. We won't be able to throw that switch and say distributed generation tomorrow. That's why in North Carolina, we've proposed solar on the rooftop, and we're going to build it because we want to test a distributed generation system. We want to see how it works, how it affected our voltage levels. Can we manage it? Can we provide the same level of reliability? We wouldn't be proposing it unless we thought we were smart enough to figure it out. So I think there will be a role for distributed generation going forward, and I think the technologies will evolve. I know my son today is working on a startup company that produces commercial storage. I mean, we're talking 1 megawatt storage, which would be kind of industry-side storage. I don't know whether it's going to work at the end of the day. I'm hoping with 4 children it works. But the fact of the matter, I mean, he's got 4 children. But the fact of the matter is we need more people like that taking chances on these new technologies because storage is the holy grail. And when my son got ready to take the job, I said, well, you know, Benjamin, I said, I'm not smart on technology. I'm a lawyer. And I said, the way you have to think about it is Thomas Edison in 1900 said that he thought that storage would fundamentally transform our industry and the development of storage was just around the corner. Well, it's been just around the corner for 100 years, and maybe the technology he's working on will work. I know there are a lot of other technologies that are being developed on storage around the country. We will figure it out, and it will transform how we think about it. So my response is yes, there's a place for distributed generation. Yes, we need to experiment with it. Yes, we need to invest in it. Yes, we need to put research dollars in. And I think it will play an increasing role going forward. And from an energy security standpoint, distributed generation, there's an argument can be made there for it. But again, it gets back to the tension between affordable, reliable, and clean and working our way through the process. We can't, as an industry, be afraid of it. We need to embrace it. And from our standpoint, we're into embracing it because we think over time it may or may not prove out, but we want to be part of making it happen if it does.
Time for one more question. Ken, right here. Let me give you this microphone, pal.
Thank you, Skip. My name is Ken Smith. Question I have for you, Ms. Rogers, is in looking through some material that the Save a Watt program was a condition of approval for the Cliffside coal plant. So with that behind me and that fact out there, our experience with the Arkansas legislature and with work with utilities in past have demonstrated that, for the most part, that utilities seem to be in lockstep against renewable portfolio standards or energy efficiency resource standards. But however, today you have stated that at least you as a utility CEO is in support of a cap and trade provision. Would you find that of being a common agreement by the utility industry, being general support of cap and trade, and that at least on this one important energy item that the country could move forward together on cap and trade, given the opposition that we have seen from our own utilities here in Arkansas, but actually utilities elsewhere outside of the country? So I guess that's my main question to you is, do you see the utilities coming behind a cap and trade policy?
I'm in a good position to talk about that because I've chaired EEI, which is our industry association. And 2 years ago when I was chairman, I had two things I wanted to achieve. One I didn't think I'd get done. One is a consensus with respect to carbon regulation, and the other was on energy efficiency. And the good news is I serendipitously achieved both. Because what our industry agreed to do is to support cap and trade as an industry, because we believe that we needed to embrace it and that putting a cap on emissions and declining over time was the right answer. Getting a price on carbon is the right approach, and making sure the transition period worked in a way that smoothed out the impact on consumers was the right answer. I will tell you at EEI we've had a very rough time getting a consensus on renewable portfolio standards because it really goes to the fact that every state has different resources. I know in North Carolina, for instance, we have a renewable portfolio standard now within the state that we supported. But the fact of the matter is it's much different than the one that California has, it's much different than the one that Texas has, because we don't have wind. I mean, we do on the mountaintops in the western part, but we're not building, trust me, the environmentalists will not let us build wind turbines on those ridges. And then there's the only other place we have wind is on the coast and the Outer Banks, and I'm not envisioning that as an outcome. But in between, when you put a wind map on the state, we just don't have much wind. Plus, the people in our state are really concerned with pricing. We want to keep the prices down. We have a provision that says you can have a renewables target, but you don't have to hit it if it drives your prices up X amount in 1 year as a consequence of that investment. So it puts pressure on the renewable industry to bring their prices down, which isn't a bad answer. I'm of the view, because in our 5 states, 2 out of the 5 states have renewable portfolio standards that we supported, but each state is different, each has crafted it differently, and I would go so far as to say, if you put cap and trade in place, you don't need a renewable portfolio standard in this country or in any state, because it becomes belt and suspenders. Because a cap on carbon and a cap on emissions that's declining and a price is all you need to get the economics right, to make the right investments for the future. So it becomes redundant to me in that context, particularly since there's been great legislation passed to give tax incentives and bonus depreciation for wind, which we invest in, and solar, which we invest in our commercial part of our business. So we see it as unnecessary in the context of a cap and trade legislation passage.
Let's give Jim a